Hey everyone, welcome back to AskAVC. My name is Ryan Floyd and I'm a partner at Storm Ventures. Today, I want to talk to you about getting to a term sheet. A few videos ago, I talked to you about some of the details of a term sheet, some of the major terms and so forth. And today, I want to talk about the process leading up to it. Because there's a lot of questions I often get asked about how much information to share. Is it okay to begin talking with some of the junior members on an investment team? And that's what I want to dive into today. So let's get started. Okay, so you're on your way, you're ready to start raising money, and you've got some relationships with some funds. Maybe an analyst or an associate or a principal, a non-partners either contacted you or you found a way to contact them. Maybe you've sent them a cold email. I get asked the question all the time, is it worth an entrepreneur's time or a founder's time to spend it with a non-partner of a firm? And I'll tell you that unequivocally the answer is yes. And let me tell you why. Most venture funds are set up as a team. They work together to make the best investment decisions that they can. And on that team, there's likely going to be some folks that are not partners. They're more junior in their career, they're coming up the curve, but they still have influence in the firm. In fact, one of the primary jobs of the younger folks in the firm is to surface new opportunities and obviously assist with making investments. So it's a natural part of the workflow at most venture funds. And in fact, at some funds, it's held in very high regard when one of their junior members sources a deal because it really validates the model. So I tell all of our companies, and I'll tell you, absolutely spend time with junior folks on an investment team, but let me qualify it up to a point. Now, if you've had a couple of meetings and there's been no one else on the investment team that's shown any interest in your company, well, that is definitely a barometer for how the firm is thinking about the opportunity. And it's important at some point to transition to a broader group and certainly to those who can make investment decisions, because it is very unlikely that an associate or principal can make a decision on their own. And it's important to get feedback from the broader investment team. Because sometimes, junior folks on the team may have a hard time filtering what the broader firm may be interested in. They may have a hard time translating it. They may have a hard time telling the story. They may have a hard time giving you feedback. So at some point, it is important to transition to a broader group, maybe after the second meeting. But please take that early meeting with junior members on the team if that's the way it works out, because it absolutely can lead to an investment. What follows with that is I get asked the question often, how much information should I be sharing with this venture firm? They showed interest. They're asking for things. Should I feel comfortable sharing it? Obviously, it depends. But here's some good rules of thumb. It's kind of common sense. If you've had a first meeting with a venture fund and they ask for the deck that you gave them as you walk through, well, that makes sense to share that with them, right? You've already walked through all that information. If in that presentation you spent time, let's say, talking about your financials, right, in terms of where the business is, a venture firm very likely is going to ask you, could you share some of the financials with me? Well, that makes sense too. Now, after that first meeting though, if they ask you for a detailed customer list, that makes no sense at all. They don't need that. They don't need that to make the next decision in their process to say whether or not your company is a good fit for them. And so it doesn't make sense to share that much detailed information. But as you progress through that process with that firm, there may be additional diligence requests. Some of them you may feel are fairly sensitive to your business. But I would tell you that those business requests, you should make every effort to share that with a venture firm in some meaningful way. And this is why. Because when you get to that term sheet, you want to have not a single business issue outstanding. You want to make sure you've disclosed everything to that venture firm, because one of the binding terms in that term sheet is going to be exclusivity. And if you've held back information and you agree to terms of the venture firm, you may think that's great. But what may happen is if that information you've held back changes the mind of the venture investor for some way, maybe they decide to recut the deal, or maybe they decide not to even invest. And that would be terrible because you've shut off all your other opportunities at that point. So you've done yourself a disservice by not sharing. Now, implicit in all of this is trust in the process. You have to believe that the firm is making progress in their diligence and their requests make sense against the time that they've spent. If you've had one phone call with a junior member on the investment team and they ask for every piece of diligence material, I think you should feel very comfortable pushing back and saying something like, I'd be happy to share that with you as we make more progress. Okay, so one of the other questions I get asked all the time is, can I negotiate a term sheet, for fear that maybe that's going to offend a venture investor, and, maybe you're going to, lose the opportunity as a founder. You should absolutely feel comfortable negotiating a term sheet and not be shy at all about asking for things that are important to you. Venture investors are making lots of investments. They're very used to having these conversations. And importantly for you, it gives you an opportunity to see how the person on the other side of the table is going to think about some of these kind of challenging conversations and how they interact with you. It's just a great opportunity to get a bit of a view into the future about how that person is going to behave. That may influence how much you're willing to bend on terms or whether that's the firm that you want to work with. And if you don't negotiate anything, you're not going to get a sense for that in terms of how that person behaves. Secondly, sometimes it's not intuitive what's most important to a venture firm. You may think as a founder, the most important thing is valuation. And it may be, but it may not be. It turns out there's many venture firms that while valuation is important and it's on a list, what might be most important to them is ownership. So for that venture firm, being able to invest maybe a dollar amount or getting to a certain ownership number is going to be way more important than the valuation. And unless you ask the questions and really try to ask them what's important and negotiate to understand these things, you may not get the best terms that you could get. With that being said, in my experience, venture firms are not putting out term sheets that they're lowballing opportunities. They're going to be thoughtful, because if you've watched my video series, you know that one of the most important things for venture investors is kind of reputation. And the last thing that a venture investor wants is a reputation for lowballing opportunities, because if they get that kind of reputation, who's going to want to work with them? So you should expect that whatever terms come in, that's going to be in the zone of what that venture investor is likely going to be willing to do, outside of some extreme circumstances that you might be able to push them to. And realize too that there's some terms like ownership and valuation that obviously are going to be very important to a venture fund, but there may be other terms that there's a lot more flexibility on. How many board seats? Do they have to have a board seat? Do they have to have observer rights? These things I think are probably more flexible for most firms than necessarily the economic terms. There is one term I think that's worth spending a few more minutes on, and that's the sort of the exclusivity and when does it make sense to potentially ask for an extension to the deadline. You've gotten to this point with a term sheet with a firm, and you've been working furiously, and they give you a term sheet and they give you 24 hours to sign. And you just don't have enough time. Maybe you're waiting for another firm that you really like to indicate whether they're interested. Maybe you haven't even spun up your attorney on understanding the terms and kind of getting through it. Maybe you've been trying to close a big customer and you just haven't been focused on it. It can be really tricky around these deadlines. And the best thing that you can do is, before you get a term sheet from a firm, already have a lot of the work done. You're going to have a pretty good sense of whether or not your company is going to be getting a term sheet. Are there multiple firms interested? Is it feeling like it's likely just a function of price? As you move into that stage, spend time with attorneys understanding the basic terms. Our term sheet's only a page and a half. It's very short. There's not a lot to it, and I think we're fairly representative of most venture firms. So understanding those terms going into it is important, because it'll just speed up the time it takes to you respond to a particular fund. And if you have to go back and ask for an extension, which is totally okay, you need to be able to really articulate why, and it has to probably be for a relatively short amount of time, unless you are willing to let that fund go. Because once a venture firm gives you a term sheet, what they don't want to be is a stalking horse for you to use to go, try and get a better deal somewhere else. And I think that's, it's reasonable that a venture firm can have that expectation. So, and obviously I'm a bit biased, but I think expecting a firm to wait a week while you talk to everybody else, it's not really fair to me, because I've spent all this time digging in and doing my best, and then to give you a week to figure it out. So having other firms kind of converging all at the same time is a really good strategy around that, to deal with that, so that you don't have to ask for long extensions, and then it really does become a forcing function in really getting to a signed term sheet. Okay, so one final thought on getting to a term sheet, and that's really around style. And this is maybe a little bit more qualitative. But realize that getting to a term sheet, it's not transactional, at least not in the way I view it. Once an investor puts money into your company, they're going to be with you for a very long time. And it's very hard to separate that out. So my advice to people is to go into this thinking about it as the beginning of a relationship. And there's a lot of things then that fall out of it, thinking about it that way versus thinking about it transactionally. Look, a venture investor is not buying a car and you're not selling one. This is a partner that's going to be involved in your business for a long time. So think about proceeding through all of these conversations, being as transparent as you can be with where you are in the process, what's important to you, thoughts about valuation, thoughts about money raised. I think those are all good things to have conversations with your potential investor about, because it's going to give you an opportunity to sort of interact on some of those difficult topics. If you play games, it can result in absolute disaster. First of all, remember, most venture investors are doing this all the time. And so they're likely going to pick up on the fact that something's not right. And if they feel gamed during the process of getting to a term sheet, how do you think they're going to think you're going to treat them after they invest? It's likely they may not even get to a term sheet if they feel gamed. Now, sometimes the dynamics of a round where there's so much interest and there's so many investors that the rules change a bit. But I'm really talking about most situations where there's a handful of investors that are interested in you and you're interested in a handful of investors and you're trying to figure out the best path forward. I think playing games is the worst advice that you could get as a founder. I mean, this is your company. This is the company you've worked so hard to build. Why would you risk it bluffing a hand with a venture investor, telling them you have lots of other interest when you don't? And if you do have interest, saying something like, there are other interested parties I'm spending time with, suffices. That lets a venture investor know timeline, scale, lots of things that communicates. Likewise, venture investors should be thoughtful. And if anyone says, hey, what is firm X telling you about what their valuation is going to be? You should not feel compelled at all to answer that question, because that's not your job. Your job is to present the best story you can and to bring investors in, and for investors to figure out what the valuation ought to be, not the other way around. But it's the beginning, and in some ways it's very tough to begin a relationship in this kind of transactional, potentially even confrontational engagement, but it also provides an opportunity. And so if you proceed with integrity and sincerity, it doesn't mean you have to roll on any business issues, but it does mean that you have to have those values, I think, to pull out the best opportunity going forward. It's like anything else in life. You just want to treat people the way you want to be treated as well. And I think that's the way you're going to get to the best terms possible. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching AskAVC. Some thoughts on getting to a term sheet. Leave me any comments, engage with me, let me know what you think. If there's something else you'd like me to put out a video on, or thoughts on this, other things maybe I've missed, let me know and let's have a conversation offline. And until next time, thank you and talk to you then.